In Manhattan's five-star hotel, humble waitress Claire corrected French millionaire Ethan at breakfast. The entire room froze, but the real shock came after. When her bosses demoted her to the laundry room, no one could predict the millionaire would knock on her door saying, "I've been looking for you." What was in this ordinary waitress's past that impacted the wealthy businessman so deeply? What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Manhattan awakened with a gray sky and a faint aroma of freshly baked bread escaping from the side streets of the Upper East Side. The Belmont Hotel, a five-star with a view of Central Park, began its silent and precise routine. Waiters, receptionists, cooks, and cleaners moved like invisible pieces on a bright stage designed not to see them. Claire had been working at that hotel for 3 years. She was 34 years old, dark-haired, always pulled back in a low bun, and had eyes that seemed to observe everything without being noticed. Punctual, quiet, and efficient. She was the type of employee who didn't call attention to herself, and precisely because of that, no one listened when she spoke. That morning, however, something in the atmosphere was different. A rumor ran through the hallways. Ethan Bellrose, the French investor who had bought half of the California coast in the last 5 years, would be staying at the hotel for a week. Some employees were nervous, others excited. The hotel director ordered special protocols, double cleaning in the hallways, exclusive menu, and of course, only experienced staff attending his private meals. Claire didn't apply, she never did. But at 9:03 in the morning, when there were barely 7 minutes left before Bellrose's breakfast would begin in the private dining room, a coworker had an anxiety attack in the locker room. No one else was available, and Claire, with the tray still in hand, was called without notice. "You go. It's just serving coffee. You don't have to talk," the supervisor told her without looking her in the eye. Claire didn't protest. She nodded silently, adjusted her apron, and walked down the carpeted hallway to the door of the private dining room, not knowing she was about to enter a scene that would change her life. Inside the dining room, 3 men in suits were discussing in French next to a young woman taking notes. Ethan Bellrose, seated in the center, held a glass of juice with the confidence of someone who has never been contradicted. When Claire entered, the atmosphere didn't change. To them, she was just another waitress. She served the coffee with precise movements, without interrupting the conversation. But then, in the middle of an anecdote about his business in Morocco, Bellrose raised his voice and quoted a proverb in French. The others nodded. One even let out a brief laugh. But Claire, without seeking it, reacted barely audible. She murmured while removing an empty cup. "Excuse me, but that proverb isn't exactly like that." There was a sudden silence. Bellrose frowned, puzzled, slowly turned toward her. "Excuse me?" Claire stopped. The tray still in the air. She hesitated for a second, but it was too late to go back. "What you quoted isn't the traditional form of the proverb. It doesn't actually talk about dogs, but about ungrateful men." A heavy pause fell over the room. All eyes were on her. Bellrose observed her as if trying to understand if what had just happened was real. His voice became lower but tense. "And who are you?" Claire lowered her gaze, not out of fear but out of habit. "I'm just a waitress, sir." The woman taking notes laughed. One of the men turned his face toward the window, uncomfortable. Bellrose said nothing more, just drank a sip of coffee and looked away as if she weren't there. But the tension in the air no longer dissipated. And Claire, as she closed the door behind her, knew she had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. In the hallways of the Belmont Hotel, the walls heard more than was said aloud. Claire's correction of the French magnate had filtered through like an electric current among the staff. It wasn't a shout, nor an argument, nor a scandal, but the silence that followed her words was enough for everyone to know that something out of the ordinary had occurred. In the kitchen, 2 waiters whispered by the industrial coffee maker. "They say she left him speechless, that she corrected him as if she were his teacher," murmured one, lowering his voice. "And he didn't fire her, right?" asked the other, surprised. Not yet. Claire, for her part, continued her shift as if nothing had happened. She prepared the lunch tables, discreetly cleaned the breakfast crumbs, and avoided the curious eyes of her colleagues. She didn't regret it, but she wasn't seeking attention either. She had grown up learning not to stand out and knew that in certain places, being too visible could be costly. However, not everyone at the hotel shared her prudence. In the middle of the afternoon, the dining room supervisor, Miranda, intercepted her in the tablecloth storage room. She had her cell phone in hand and an expression of carefully made-up impatience. "Claire, what happened this morning with Mr. Bellrose?" Claire hesitated before responding. "I just corrected him. It wasn't my intention to offend him." Miranda sighed, visibly annoyed. "You're not here to correct anyone. You're here to serve, smile, and disappear. Understand?" Claire nodded silently, without lowering her gaze this time. But the comment hung in the air. Serve, smile, and disappear, as if that were her role. Her only acceptable function in that world. What no one knew was that while they were trying to make her feel small, on another floor of the hotel, Ethan Bellrose was browsing on his phone through a series of articles about French proverbs. And in all of them, Claire's version was correct. The correction had left him exposed. But what bothered him most wasn't the error, but that he had made it in front of others, and that the one who pointed it out was a simple waitress. That night, while dining alone in his suite, he said quietly to his assistant, "Find out who she is. I don't like being corrected, and even less when I don't know who I'm dealing with." The next day, Claire received an unexpected instruction. She had to be in charge of Mr. Bellrose's private breakfast again. But this time, she would no longer be invisible. The next morning dawned with a light rain over the rooftops of Manhattan. From the windows of the private dining room, the drops slid slowly, distorting the view of the city, as if it were an impressionist painting. Claire arrived on time, with her uniform perfectly ironed, and her hair pulled back as always. She didn't ask why she had been assigned again to Ethan Bellrose's service. She knew that in that place, decisions didn't always come with explanations. When she entered the room, the atmosphere was different from the day before. Only Ethan was there, sitting by the window browsing through a French newspaper. He didn't look up when she placed the tray on the table or when she served the coffee, but he spoke, and his voice sounded calculatedly casual. "Today I read about the proverb. You were right." Claire stopped for a second, surprised, but maintained a neutral expression. "I'm glad you checked, sir." He closed the newspaper slowly. "Not many people correct me, even less so in public." There was a brief silence. Claire didn't respond. It wasn't a conversation she had sought. "Where did you study French?" he then asked, his gaze fixed on his cup. Claire hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she didn't know how far she should give it. "I learned it as a child. At home." Bellrose finally looked up. His clear eyes examined her with more attention than the day before. There was something in her tone, in her composure, that didn't fit with the image he had of a waitress. "French, my mother was." She said no more. Claire continued her work in silence, discreetly collecting the crumbs, cleaning with precision, as if that brief conversation hadn't touched her in the slightest. But when she left the dining room, Ethan remained watching the door through which she had disappeared. Something about her deeply disconcerted him. Hours later, while his assistant delivered financial reports and investment proposals, Ethan interrupted without warning. "Did you get anything on Claire?" The assistant hesitated for a second. "Uncomfortable." "Just the basics, sir. She lives in Queens. She's worked here for 3 years. She has no social media. There's not much more. That's the strange thing. No trace from before, nothing relevant. As if she had started from scratch when she arrived here." Ethan kept silent. He wasn't used to not finding information about someone. That night, as he walked down the hotel hallway, he crossed paths with Claire by accident. She was coming out of the cleaning closet with a bucket in her hand. They greeted each other barely with a nod, but just as he had already passed, she stopped. Without turning around, she said quietly, "Not everything that isn't seen is a void, Mr. Bellrose. Sometimes it's just something that doesn't wish to be found." He turned slowly, but Claire had already turned the corner, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt he didn't have control of the conversation. In the eyes of others, Claire remained a shadow among dishes in hallways, but in Ethan Bellrose's mind, she had become an anomaly impossible to ignore. Her presence was uncomfortable to him, not because of what she did, but because of what she awakened in him: doubt. In the following days, the businessman tried several times to start casual conversations with her during breakfasts. Veiled questions, soft comments, small baits disguised as courtesy. But Claire always responded with firm politeness, without giving space for familiarities. The scene didn't go unnoticed. The other employees began to notice that the French millionaire seemed curious, too curious. Miranda, the supervisor, interpreted it as a threat. "She's playing with fire," she said quietly to another waiter. "And she's not as smart as she thinks. Someone like that doesn't tolerate being left in the background." That morning, Miranda did something she had been preparing for some time. She filed a formal complaint against Claire for unprofessional attitude and out-of-place comments in front of clients. When Claire was called to the Human Resources office, she wasn't surprised. She listened silently to the vaguely worded accusations. She didn't defend herself. She didn't raise her voice. She only said one sentence at the end. "Can I know if the client has complained personally?" The coordinator avoided answering directly. "Let's say it's a preventive measure for the hotel's image." Claire signed the report with calm hands. She knew what an official warning meant. A stain. A silent threat. That afternoon, she wasn't assigned to the next day's breakfast. She returned to room cleaning. But something had changed. While collecting towels on the 6th floor, she heard a conversation behind a barely open door. Ethan was on the phone, his voice agitated in French. "I'm not asking for a work profile, I'm asking for a history. Where did she study? Where did she live before arriving here? She can't not exist." Claire moved away without making noise. It wasn't the first time someone wanted to unearth what she had been burying for years, but it was the first time it was done out of simple wounded pride. That night, Miranda intercepted her near the locker room. "You think you're very special, don't you? Correcting millionaires, making them look for you, but you'll see how this ends. People like you, no one protects them." Claire didn't respond, but for the first time she lowered her gaze not out of resignation, but because of something deeper. The weight of the past, calling at the door again. And just when it seemed everything could stabilize, the chapter closed with a public humiliation. A notice on the hotel's internal board informed that due to restructuring, some staff members would be reassigned to less visible tasks. Claire was one of them. The message didn't carry her name, but everyone knew it was for her. And Claire, while folding sheets in a windowless room, knew she was starting to lose. The following days passed in silence, but not in peace. Claire was transferred to internal laundry tasks, a basement without windows where the hot steam and the constant hum of the machines created an oppressive atmosphere. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. It was as if her very existence had become uncomfortable for everyone. Miranda didn't hide her satisfaction. She passed through the laundry area with a haughty walk, pretending not to see her, as if Claire no longer belonged to the same world. She was just another shadow among damp sheets and laundry baskets. Meanwhile, Ethan Bellrose continued staying at the hotel, and although he tried to concentrate on his business, there was something that troubled him. He didn't find her at breakfasts. He didn't see her in the hallways. And that instead of calming him disturbed him more. One morning, not seeing her anymore in his service, he went directly to the hotel director. He did so in a friendly tone, almost as if it didn't matter. "What happened to the waitress who served me the first few days? Claire, I think her name is." The director, a nervous man always willing to please, hesitated for a moment. "Oh, Claire. Well, she's been reassigned. We had some minor inconveniences." "Nothing worrying, sir." "Inconveniences?" "Indiscreet attitude, comments outside protocol." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just nodded with a neutral expression, but something in his gaze hardened. That same afternoon, he went down to the laundry level. No one stopped him. The employees looked at him with surprise and fear. When Claire saw him enter, she wasn't surprised, as if she had expected it. "Is this what they do with people who think differently?" Ethan asked without beating around the bush. Claire wiped her hands on her apron before speaking. "This is what they do with people who don't know how to stay in their place." He approached a few more steps. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his tone, but a confused mixture of respect and frustration. "You could work anywhere else. Why do you stay here?" Claire hesitated. Then she looked at him with a calm that couldn't be faked. "Because someone has to stay where others pretend not to see." At that moment, Miranda appeared at the entrance, visibly uncomfortable. She didn't speak to Claire, but to the guest. "Mr. Bellrose, if you need something, I can take you to the executive lounge. Here isn't appropriate." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes were still on Claire. It was then that the inevitable occurred. Miranda turned toward Claire and loudly, in front of all the employees present, pronounced the words that marked the break. "You are nobody here. You have no education. You have no position. You're just lucky to have this job. Remember that, ma'am. No one came to this hotel to hear opinions from a woman who irons towels." The silence was brutal. Some lowered their heads. Others simply remained motionless, frozen by the weight of the public humiliation. Claire, without responding, continued folding a sheet. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face showed nothing. Bellrose, on the other hand, slowly turned toward Miranda. His gaze was no longer neutral. And you should remember that some positions don't grant dignity. They can take it away, but the wound had already been done. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She stared for hours at the ceiling of her small apartment in Queens, wondering if it had really been worth it all, if silence was preferable to humiliation, if maybe, just maybe, it was time to leave. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't know if she could return the next day. Claire didn't go to work the next day. She didn't call, didn't send a message, didn't leave excuses. She simply disappeared from the shift as if the heavy air of the laundry had ended up evaporating her. At reception, some asked in low voices if she had been fired. In the kitchen, others whispered that she had resigned, but no one knew for certain. Miranda, satisfied, circulated the most convenient version. She left because she couldn't take the pressure, but Ethan Bellrose didn't settle for silence. He wasn't looking for the version that was most repeated. He was looking for the truth. And that truth began to take shape when his assistant, after days of investigations without results, finally appeared in his room with a small folder in hand. "I found something, but it's not in work records or networks. It's in an old French academic file." Ethan left the coffee on the table, interested. "And well?" The assistant opened the folder. "Claire Martin, born in Toulouse. French mother, Spanish father. She lived in France until she was 19. Then she disappears from the systems. But before that, she was accepted to the Sorbonne, translation and philosophy. On scholarship." Bellrose frowned. "And what happened?" "She left the university before finishing the first year. She moved to the United States. There are no official documents explaining why." Ethan remained silent. He closed the folder slowly. Everything was beginning to fit. Her way of speaking, her precise correction, her restraint. And above all, that strange brightness in the eyes of someone who has already lost more than once but refuses to break. That same afternoon, he looked for her. He asked discreetly at reception. Then he bribed a maintenance employee to get her address. And at nightfall, he walked through the narrow streets of Queens to a modest building with peeling walls and clothes hanging on the balconies. He knocked on the door twice. Then a third time, Claire opened without surprise. She looked at him as if she already knew he would come. "I'm not coming to apologize," he said directly. "I'm glad because you don't need to. I just wanted to understand why someone who is accepted to the Sorbonne ends up serving coffee in silence at a hotel." She leaned her body against the doorframe. Her eyes softened, but her voice didn't. "Because a diploma doesn't save anyone from pain or abandonment or difficult decisions." He waited in silence. Claire then took a step inside. She spoke without looking. "My mother got sick that same year, cancer. My father was no longer there. No one else could take care of her. I left everything and moved with her to New York, where she had lived as a young woman. I worked at whatever I found. And when she died, I was no longer the same person who dreamed of books." The revelation wasn't grandiose. It didn't have spectacular twists or elite secrets. It was rawer, more real, more human. Bellrose felt something inside him break. Not out of guilt, but because of the brutal truth of what isn't seen. You could have returned. To what? The world doesn't wait. No one saves a place for those who stop. Silence settled between them like a silent truce, an acceptance. And in that moment, Ethan understood what he had ignored since the first day. Claire didn't need recognition or apologies or opportunities. The only thing she demanded, without ever saying it, was that they not despise her for choosing the most difficult thing: to stay. The next day, the atmosphere at the Belmont Hotel seemed charged with something no one could name. A subtle rumor was beginning to circulate like an invisible thread that stitched nervous glances among employees. Claire had returned. She appeared without dramatics, with her clean uniform and her hair pulled back as always. She greeted with a minimal gesture, took the cleaning cart, and went down to the basement as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Miranda saw her from the end of the hallway and pursed her lips. Her instinct told her that something had gotten out of control, and she confirmed it an hour later when she received an unexpected call from management. Mr. Bellrose has requested that Claire return to his service personally. That's not possible, she responded, trying to keep her voice firm. There are protocols. It's a direct request from the most important guest we have this week. Do it. The humiliation was double. Not only did she have to reinstate Claire, but she wasn't allowed to inform her. It was the director himself who went down to the laundry to tell her in person. Claire listened with a serene expression. She accepted returning to the breakfast shift without euphoria, without reproaches, without questions, as if she knew that the real victory wasn't returning, but staying whole. The news reached Ethan quickly, who, upon seeing her enter the private dining room again with the tray in her hands, smiled honestly for the first time. But what happened next wasn't what he expected. Claire didn't resume her previous role. She didn't stay quiet. She didn't fit back docilely into the mold. While serving coffee, she spoke to him without raising her voice. I came back because I know who I am, not because someone brought me back. He nodded, lowering his gaze. He had finally understood that he couldn't compensate for what he had ignored. In the hallways, the employees began to look at her differently, not with sympathy, but with a new form of respect. Even those who used to whisper now fell silent when she passed. And Miranda? Miranda exploded. She entered the management office that same afternoon, demanding explanations, suggesting that a guest's influence was interfering with the hotel's internal affairs. The director, tired of her manipulations, was clear. It's not because of the guest. It's because of you. Your way of managing staff has been under observation for some time. For the first time, Miranda lost her color. She left without saying a word. And in the last scene of the day, as the sun descended over the terraces of Manhattan, Ethan asked for a special favor, that Claire accompany him on a short walk outside the hotel, just to talk, without trays, without hierarchies. She looked at him for a long time before responding. A walk doesn't change what happened or what I am. I know, he said, but maybe it'll help me understand who I was. That evening they walked along Fifth Avenue like two people who no longer owed each other anything. And although there were no apologies or promises, there was something even rarer. A sincere peace between two worlds that for a moment managed to meet. 3 weeks passed since that walk. The Belmont Hotel returned to its usual rhythm. Suitcases coming in and out, receptionists changing shifts, tourists taking photos of the marble lobby, as if everything that had happened had been just a brief interruption. But in the smallest gestures, something had changed. Claire was no longer in the laundry. She had been assigned to a new role, floor supervisor, a more discreet position, but with real authority. Her name now appeared on the internal coordination board. Some saw it as a favor from Mr. Bellrose, others as an attempt by the hotel to clean up its own image. She simply accepted it as a new space from which to work with dignity, without speeches, without explanations. The first time Miranda saw her walking down the hallway with a folder in hand, she diverted without saying a word. She had been transferred to another shift, less visible, and no longer spoke to anyone beyond what was strictly necessary. One afternoon, briefly crossing paths with Claire in the elevator, she murmured without looking at her. It wasn't personal. Claire didn't respond, but this time she didn't lower her gaze. Meanwhile, Ethan Bellrose returned to France without making noise. He didn't leave letters or gifts or grand farewells, just a postcard sent days later to the hotel with his company's letterhead. On it was a handwritten sentence in French. Certaines personnes n'ont pas besoin de pouvoir pour inspirer le respect, seulement de rester debout. Some people don't need power to inspire respect, only to remain standing. The postcard was placed in Claire's locker by someone anonymous. She read it silently and kept it without saying anything. Over time, her figure became familiar in the hallways, no longer invisible but not dominant either. Some came to her for help. others simply to greet her with a brief but sincere smile. But most importantly, in the end, Claire didn't need revenge, or vengeance, or public recognition. The only thing that really changed was that no one dared to speak of her as just a waitress anymore. And in that silent transformation that no one celebrated with applause or speeches, her true victory was found.